The happiness that is known and experienced in the heart is a happiness which is already sufficient and complete. Then this entire world and all other worlds, however many there may be in the universe of samsara, appear not to exist. That which does exist, and which is quite clear and apparent, is the citta with Dhamma, which seems to cover the whole universe, though it is impossible to explain this or compare it to anything, because there are no characteristics or data by which one can classify it. The citta that possesses the ultimate Dhamma, Acharya Dhamma, does not exist within the realms of convention, so there is no basis for making any comparisons or suppositions. After the end of that Vassa period, some faithful lay supporters from Sawang Dandin in Sagon Nakhon province traveled to the cave to invite him to return with them and kindly be their teacher. So he was obliged to leave the place where he had been staying, even though he longed to remain there, as he had not thought of going elsewhere for a long time. Having taught the villagers for some time, he took leave of them and went wandering wherever he felt like going in the manner of Tuatanga Kamartana bhikkhus. Sometimes he crossed the Mekong River into Laos, where he stayed on the banks of the river. Later he crossed back into Thailand and continued wandering and practicing the way in Dong Mo Tong, a mountainous area covered with thick jungle which straddles the districts of Bungan and Phon Pisai. In that area were many good places suitable for practicing the way. There were also some newly established villages made up of only a few houses. The people in those villages invited him to spend the Vassa there for their benefit. As it was a place that suited his temperament, he agreed to stay there for the Vassa period. While he was staying and practicing Dhamma in the hills of the Phon Pisai district, he was fascinated and glad at heart to see all the different kinds of animals living there, for whom he had much metta. The animals he saw included wild fowl, pheasant, all sorts of birds like hornbill and peacock, as well as animals like the palm civet, barking deer, wild boar, ordinary deer, monkeys of various kinds, gibbons, wild dogs, tigers, leopards, elephants, wild oxen, and red bulls. He saw far more of each of those species there than he had seen anywhere else. There were herds of them roaming everywhere. Day and night he could hear their cries echoing loudly through the forest, each group according to its own natural rhythm. Some days when he went out walking for Brindabada, he saw a large tiger walking most gracefully in the forest ahead of him. It was quite close to him, walking fearlessly, proud and dignified as is its nature. When there was a clearing in the forest ahead of him, it was beautiful to see the way it walked. The first time he saw the tiger, it glanced at him just momentarily and went on walking without looking back at him again, as though it was not in the least afraid of him. But inwardly it was probably careful and watchful, which is in character for an animal that has good mindfulness and is inherently cautious. It does not easily relax and make a mistake. As for Ajaan Khao, he had no thought of fear for the tiger, because he had seen them before on many occasions. He had heard them growling and roaring so often while staying in the forests that he travelled through, where it was quite normal for such animals to live, that he was quite accustomed to them and had no fear of them. One evening during the Vassa, as he sat teaching the way of Gamartana to the several bhikkhus staying with him, he heard 3 large striped tigers roaring in the distance, each one in a different direction. After a while he heard them growling threateningly and fighting with each other. Then they went completely quiet. Later he heard them growling and fighting close by. In the beginning, he heard them playing and fighting outside the area where the bhikkhus were staying. When they subsequently went quiet, he thought they had moved on somewhere else, but that wasn't the case, for at about 9 p.m. they approached the small meeting hall, the sala, where the bhikkhus were sitting in samadhi, listening to the Dhamma teaching, and crawled into the space under the floor. The floor of the sala was raised just over 1 meter above the ground, and the sound of these tigers roaring and growling and fighting there together was so disruptive that Ajaan Khao had to shout at them, saying, "Hey, my 3 friends, Don't make such a noise. The bhikkhus are listening to a talk on Dhamma. Doing evil like this could land you in hell. Don't say I didn't warn you. This is not the right place to cause a commotion, so you should all go away and roar elsewhere. This is a monastery for bhikkhus who like to develop calm, unlike you. So go roar to your heart's content somewhere else where nobody will interfere with you. Here the bhikkhus practice the way of Dhamma, and they do not give you permission to make a lot of noise and disturbance. As soon as they heard Ajaan Khao shouting at them, they went quiet and still for a short while, but he could still hear them, as if they were whispering to each other quietly under the sala, saying, "We better not make much noise. The bhikkhus are annoyed and shouting at us, so we must talk quietly, or else it will be bad, and we may soon end up with sores on our heads." But after a while they again started growling and playfully fighting each other. They did not seem to want to go elsewhere, as Ajaan Khao had told them to do. It seemed as though they had all agreed that under the floor of the sala was the place for them to play and have fun from dusk until midnight, when they finally went away. Meanwhile, after Ajaan Khao had finished his teaching, the bhikkhus remained sitting there doing their samadhi practice, while the three large tigers played, fighting and growling and making a lot of noise under the sala until they went back into the forest at midnight. Only then did the bhikkhus return to their individual dwelling places. This incident was most strange and unusual. For many years Ajaan Khao had wandered in the way of Gamartana through forested areas in many different parts of the country, but he had never before seen or heard of tigers coming so close to people in a friendly manner, as if they had been close friends of the bhikkhus for a long time. Normally tigers are instinctively afraid of people, even though they are so powerful that they make people more afraid of them than almost any other animal. In general, tigers are more afraid of people than people are of tigers, so they avoid people and keep away from them. Yet these three tigers were not only unafraid of people, they even went to the extent of taking possession of the space under the floor of the small sala to play and have fun together, while a lot of bhikkhus were gathered right above them. Apparently they were not in the least afraid of the bhikkhus, who were human beings just like people everywhere. This was quite remarkable, for such animals know nothing of morality, which all people know about, yet their behavior in coming into close proximity to the bhikkhus made it look almost as though they had a good understanding of morality, which they put into practice in the way that people do. They never once displayed any menacing behavior towards the bhikkhus, although they probably did so towards each other in the knowledge that they all understood what their intentions were. Even though it took place a long time ago, I felt as if my hair was standing on end with fear while I listened to Ajaan Khao telling me about this incident, which was rather silly. Foolish, silly people are like that. Even if the Ajaans tell them stories which have a moral lesson of Dhamma buried in them, foolish and incompetent people are unlikely to listen for the purpose of extracting the moral principles from it. Instead, they show their lack of intelligence by focusing just on the storyline itself. Like myself, who showed fear shamelessly in front of Ajaan Khao while listening to his story. In addition, in writing this book, I am also displaying my timidity for those who read it to laugh at me, which is bad enough. So, having read this, please be careful not to let this kind of story penetrate your heart and haunt it, or else many of you are likely to become timid and silly people also. Most of the bhikkhus who sat in meditation listening to Ajaan Khao teaching that night were stirred up and frightened, both while they sat there and after they left the sala. Their eyes and ears were wide open when they heard the three great teachers crawl under the sala to help Ajaan Khao teach them a lesson. When their sense of contentment was confronted by their fear of tigers, the bhikkhus sitting there were scared stiff. They did not dare to let their chittas wander out freely, for fear that those three teachers might decide to jump up onto the floor of the sala and give them instructions. Actually, the behavior of the three tigers was praiseworthy, in that they did nothing unreasonably excessive or violent, such as leaping onto the floor of the sala. They knew what their basic situation in life was, and to some extent what that of the bhikkhus was, and they did not go beyond what was proper for them in their situation. Their activities were all gentle and harmonious. Then they simply went away. After that they never returned, although the district where the bhikkhus were staying was a place where tigers and all sorts of other animals roamed freely. There was never a night without some tigers wandering about the area, because it was a most suitable living environment for all sorts of wild animals. That whole mountainous area was covered with thick forest, so extensive that it would take a person many days to walk all the way through it. Many varieties of wild animals lived there in large numbers. There were many large herds of elephants and packs of wild boar, and they were not very afraid of people. Many skillful teaching methods occurred to Ajaan Khao during the year that he lived in that mountainous region. He often had to warn the other bhikkhus who were with him not to be careless in maintaining the Thutanga observances. He reminded them that they were living in an environment which made it necessary for them to be careful of many things. They had to depend on the Thutanga observances as their lifeline, and fully entrust their lives to the Dhamma and Vinaya. In that way, they could live happily, without being scared and apprehensive of things in the natural environment that might otherwise have startled them. Ajaan Khao and his disciples ate very little food, just enough to act as a medicine to support their bodies and keep them going from day to day. The village they depended on for food was newly built, and had yet to become firmly established, so they had very few lay supporters. But because they had pledged themselves to Dhamma, those bhikkhus intended to train themselves to put up with difficulties for the sake of the Dhamma of inner peace. So they were not much concerned about their living conditions, or about how much food they got on Pindabada, for such concerns could easily become obstacles in the way of what they were trying to accomplish. As for medical remedies, they considered putting up with pain and fighting sickness by striving hard in samadhi bhavana to be the most effective cure. They considered the animals that lived in the surrounding forest to be their friends and took them as examples, for they never had any medicines available to them, nor were they born in a hospital with doctors and midwives to aid them. Yet there they were, animals of all sorts, quite able to keep their family lines going, and in large numbers too. And they never showed any grief or discouragement at their lack of medical attention from doctors, nurses, and all sorts of medicines and medical devices. Bhikkhus are human beings. They are sons of the Sakya, the great teacher, whose name resounds throughout the three worlds as one who learned everything there was to know in the books of the three levels of existence by using his endurance, effort, wisdom, skill, and ability to the fullest. Never was he caught at a loss, unable to find a way out, nor was he ever weak and lazy and inclined to give up. If bhikkhus retreat, shedding tears just because of the suffering and hardships of the aches and pains experienced in sickness, which are natural conditions of the khandhas anyway, they are bound to lose out and go bankrupt, and so will not be able to guide themselves or the religion properly. Unless they are courageous and firm in putting up with natural conditions, living and experiencing them all with mindfulness and wisdom to assess and know each and every event that they come into contact with, there is no way to save themselves and escape to a lasting safe haven. When the chitta has been trained in the right way, it will find joy in Dhamma. It will gladly guide a bhikkhu to the right methods for attaining the path and fruition, without changing course or creating obstacles to cause him more trouble. The practice of the way will then steadily progress without slipping backwards, so he won't feel disheartened because he has no inner refuge. He will have the heart with Dhamma to cleanse, to soothe, and to protect him, causing him to feel peaceful and secure. Then, wherever he goes or wherever he stays, he is inherently content, sugato, in the manner of true disciples of the Tathagata, without any signs of impoverishment in his heart. Those Thutanga Kammarthana bhikkhus who are intent on Dhamma go about and live their lives like this. They can stay anywhere and go anywhere, for they are prepared to put up with hardship and hunger while remaining contented and free from anxiety, with Dhamma as the object of attachment, aramana, of their hearts. It may be difficult for the reader to accept some of the things that happen in connection with the forest animals that like to come and live close to bhikkhus. So to begin with, it may be better to consider domestic animals, which people like to look after with metta in their homes, and animals that seek sanctuary in the monasteries. The number of animals, such as dogs and birds, that want to live in monasteries increases every day, until there is hardly any room left for the dogs or trees left for the birds. Having thought about the domestic animals with which we are all familiar, we can go on to consider the various kinds of wild animals that tend to hang around the forest locales or the monasteries where Thudanga bhikkhus tend to stay. I have already written about such animals in the books Biography of Venerable Ajaan and Pratibhada, where many incidents are related of animals coming to live near the bhikkhus, all of which are experiences that I know to be true. From the viewpoint of Dhamma, these stories are quite interesting, for Dhamma is the principle of nature that gives peace and happiness, and Dhamma treats all species equally, regardless of whether or not they actually understand what Dhamma is. There is something which manifests in the experience of all beings that they are happy to accept, something which no one dislikes. That something is the natural Dhamma which manifests as calm and happiness, as peace, as trust and confidence, as goodwill, as metta, as affection and compassion, and as tolerance in which others are free to come or go as they will, without fear or danger. These are some of the things that flow from Dhamma. Animals of all kinds like it and readily accept it, without any need to attend school to be taught about it. The citta is far more compatible with the outflow of Dhamma than it is with the possession of external titles, rank, or authority, which are like ornaments that increase one's self-importance, but can easily dissolve away and disappear depending on circumstances which are fickle and uncertain. Therefore, although animals don't really know what Dhamma is, they will tend to search on their own for those things which they naturally like and can readily accept. For instance, stray dogs staying in a monastery, or wild animals living close by Thudanga bhikkhus. Animals instinctively understand that Dhamma, which means peace and security, is to be found in those places, so they search for it in their own way. Even people who've never shown any interest in Dhamma know those places which are secure and safe, and they enjoy relaxing and having fun in such places. They realize that it would not be safe to act like that in other places. This has been the case from ancient times to the present day. This explanation should be sufficient to understand how Dhamma and the places where people live and practice Dhamma make animals and people everywhere feel confident and free from danger. So they tend to relax and dispense with their usual caution. There are even some who go so far as to forget themselves completely, without stopping to consider how other people feel about it, or whether their behavior is appropriate for their religion, which is the treasure of the whole country. Even people like that know the difference between good and evil. They know the difference between good people and bad people, between good animals and bad animals, in the same way that people everywhere do. So they should think of others and how much they cherish their treasure, and they should refrain from letting go of all restraint. Limits and bounds exist within which people and animals should remain, each in its own sphere. They should not mix up their modes of behavior until they are all behaving in the same way, so one cannot tell which is which. Venerable Ajaan Khao had always liked wandering about the countryside, searching for secluded places, so he frequently moved from one place to another. Even when staying in one locale, he liked to wander Thudanga through the surrounding forests and hills, frequently changing the place where he did his meditation. For example, he used a certain location as his base, but in the morning he would walk off somewhere else to do his practice. Then in the afternoon he would go to another place, and at night he would wander off to yet another place, all in the vicinity of his base. He also used to change the direction he went in, sometimes going far and sometimes close by. At times he would change to another cave, moving from the cave which was his base, or he would go up to a rocky outcrop at the top of the mountain, returning to his base dwelling only late at night. During the period when he was engaged in a fierce struggle with his kilesas, he preferred this style of practice because he found that when he changed his situation constantly, wisdom would arise all the time. Then none of the kilesas were able to get a grip on him, because they were constantly up against the skillful means of mindfulness and wisdom, which beat them into a corner, trapping them so that they could be forced out and got rid of time after time. If he stayed always in one place, he would become accustomed to his surroundings, and complacency would set in. But the Kilesas would not become complacent. They would keep increasing regardless of what he was accustomed to. So he had to change about, altering his methods and his environment very frequently in order to keep up with the deceptive tricks of the Kilesas. For once they established themselves, they would accumulate and fight against him incessantly, without ever taking time off for rest. If there was any respite from them, it was only in deep, dreamless sleep. Otherwise, they were working all the time. Because of this, if he relaxed or weakened his efforts while striving to develop himself, putting off doing the practice and letting time slip by, it encouraged the ever-diligent Kilesas to laugh at him. By changing locations and methods of practice very frequently, he could have some success in defeating the Kilesas, which had no chance to feel satisfied that they were the sole master in charge. His reasoning was most intriguing, and his practice was an excellent example for those who refuse to let the Kilesas rise up and walk all over them due to an easygoing overconfidence that ruins every move that the Chitta makes. Venerable Ajaan Khao liked to wander in the districts of Pusing, Pūjā, Pūlanka, Dongmotong, and in the districts of Ampea Seka and Ampea Ponpisai in Nong Khai province, as well as Ampua Banpang in Nakhon Phanom province. These areas had plenty of mountains, such as Pusing, Pūjā, and Pūlanka, which were all places suitable for the practice and development of Dhamma. But they were far away from villages, too far to go Pindapata, so it was necessary to have people take turns bringing him food. All these places were full of wild animals of all sorts, including tigers, elephants, wild gaur, and red oxen, among many others. In the afternoon and evening he could hear their calls and roars echoing throughout the forest. Anyone who had not truly overcome death would find it difficult to stay there, because there were many tigers in those places, far more than in other regions, and they were not afraid of people. Some nights, as he walked in meditation, one of the tigers would creep up and crouch down to watch him walking, without any fear of him at all. But it never harmed him. It may have simply wondered what he was up to, so it crept close to sniff and have a look. As soon as Ajaan Khao heard an unusual sound that made him suspicious, he would shine his flashlight there, only to see a great tiger leap away, sometimes very close in front of him. Even after that, he was able to go on walking Jankama, doing his meditation without any fear that the tiger might return to jump on him, maul him, and eat him. His faith in Dhamma was stronger than his fear of the tiger, so he was able to persist and keep on doing his practice. Sometimes in the evening, he would climb up the hillside, from where he could see large herds of elephants going for a walk along a large area of rocky outcrops that stretched for miles. As the rocky area was not covered by forest, he could quite clearly see both large and small elephants going out to search for food. While watching those elephant herds having fun teasing each other and playing together, he became quite happily absorbed until the evening was late and it got too dark to see. It seems they liked to tease each other and play together in the same way as people do.